about love. Every love is wrong maintaining. You got to knock the legs with an eye. Don't throw a stone, you don't know. Silence what you say, it's what you do. Don't throw your stone.
Hello and welcome back to track 10 of Out on That Line. We have a very special episode for you this week. Bruce Springsteen has released his latest album, Letter to You, and that's the only one we're doing this week. So I'm here with my co-host, Alex. Alex, how you doing?
Jeff, I tell you what, it feels like Sunday on a Wednesday because we're about to go to church with the boss.
Oh, yeah. This album, and we're just going to say it right out front here. I think we're both in agreement that this album is great. Some of his best work of the later part of his career. Something I really was looking forward to it. The first two singles he let out, Letter to You and Ghost, we had mentioned on the podcast previously, if you'd listened to those. But now we've got the whole album, and man, it's a doozy. It's so good. I loved every bit of it. I think I listened to it like 5 times. You probably listened to it more. Is that right?
I mean, I've just been crushing it. Like, I've taken occasional breaks to listen to like a playlist here or there, or a song recommendation from someone else here or there. But I've been primarily mainlining this album since it came out. Literally since it came out at midnight the night it came out.
Yeah, it's in the companion piece that he did with it, the documentary about the making of the album, just to go along with it. It was an experience, more than just an album. It was an experience. And, from somebody that has been a huge Bruce Springsteen fan for, I don't even know how long, since I was little. My dad started playing him for me, when I was learning what music is, basically. This is one of the most anticipated releases I think I've ever had in my life. Thankfully, I didn't have to wait too long for it by the time he announced it. And it's just, it was everything I hoped it would be. In the later part of his career, he's had albums like Working on a Dream, the Seeger sessions, things like that were, they were Bruce, but it wasn't as, it wasn't up to the level that I found, even Magic, more recent album by him, but certainly not up to the level of, Born to Run or Darkness on the Edge of Town or The River, those, all-time classic albums that he released back in the 70s and 80s. And it's just, this one I felt like it was just getting wrapped up in Springsteen, of his entire career almost. And it was just a really incredible experience.
Well, and we'll get more into it because we like the benefit of having just this one album to talk about is it's just pure wide open road for us. And I really think that the thesis of the whole album, and he says it in the documentary, is he's in the middle of a 45-year conversation with us, with the fans, with the people who consume his music. And it really does take on the characteristics of a career retrospective, but also I don't want to say a man at the end of his life because that implies he's about to die. And I don't want to start rumors. Shout out to Margot Price. That's how rumors get started. But I really thought about it through this lens. And this is, again, not to start a rumor, but just to relate it to my thought process at the time. But when Black Star by David Bowie came out, I remember listening to it and being like, this has the weirdest, most ghoulish vibe. First of all, the album came out of nowhere. It was largely recorded in secret. And I think, let me check my notes. It came out on his 69th birthday. So it was like the surprise release. Nice. Surprise release as he turned 69. And I'm like, okay, well, this is like kind of morose, and it's like, it's definitely Bowie, and I really like it. Like, liking it was not the issue, but something felt really fucking weird. And 2 days later, he was dead because he had liver cancer, and he just didn't tell anyone. But he knew, and he constructed Black Star to be a swan song for his fans. It was what he left us before he went back to his homeworld. And I get similar vibes. I'm not, and now again, I have to say a million times, I'm not saying Bruce Springsteen is terminally ill, but I get similar, like, introspective look, a gunslinger kind of at the end of his days, looking back on the path that he's walked. And this album really encompasses, I mean, from childhood to now for Bruce Springsteen, which is fucking wild. I know he has a biography out. I know he had Springsteen on Broadway, and those are very personal too. But this feels like it encompasses his entire life in, 12 songs?
Yeah. Yep. Let me count real quick. Yeah, I think it's 12 on the nose.
I mean, it's one of those things where like the flavor changes, but the core, I mean, at its core, it's classic Bruce. And it I don't know, maybe it's corny to say, but it kind of takes your breath away when you really look at the whole thing start to finish. It's pretty amazing what he's accomplished. And like, this is the kind of album that if someone released this, maybe not thematically, but structurally and musically as a debut, you'd think they were a prodigy. I mean, he's really kind of playing a young man's game here and winning.
Yeah, it definitely, it touches on so many parts of his life. Like you said, there's, the more recent things like Clarence Clemens passing away and Danny Federici passing away, and he even goes all the way back to his first real band, the Castiles. And, and we'll get into the song, a little bit later, but the song Last Man Standing is kind of about that band. He's the only one left alive in that band, and that was his formative experience in rock and roll. One of the guys that we consider, on the Mount Rushmore of rock and roll musicians, that was his birthing into the world of that kind of music was with that band, the Castiles. And just for him to kind of acknowledge everything was really incredible. And it was a tribute. It was like they were still there with him. It was just a really kind of ethereal experience listening to this album in a very good way, and some of it was sad. I definitely have cried several times listening to these songs and watching the documentary, and just because I've grown up with this music, a lot of it was made before I was born. Some people would say his most vital work was before I was born, but it's still, the themes he's always talked about are so universal that it doesn't matter when it is, when he's talking about, because the feelings that he's talking about are going to be around forever, so it doesn't matter when you listen to it, it's always going to be relevant. It's like Seinfeld, the things that they're talking about, the things that you see, maybe not relevant today, but the themes that they're talking about are, it's that same kind of feeling that Bruce has always done. And it just felt like you were right there with him as he was processing all these things, and it felt like this album was as much of a surprise to him as it was to us, with how good it was.
And I think you get that sense, not to jump completely into the tracks, but you get that sense with the opening lines of the song, the title track, Letter to You, where, and I obviously in some of the research, it talks about he went through this intense period of writer's block. And then this guy, George Tice, who was one of the members of the Castiles, who everyone said was this like rock star in the making, very charismatic, could hold the sway of the crowd in the palm of his hand. Just this like really electric guy. And he and Bruce had their falling outs over the years, but they always remained friends and brothers. And he died in 2018. And that was kind of a huge blow to Bruce Springsteen. And it coincided with this period of intense writer's block, and then eventually just the more he kind of sat with his feelings, the more that they slowly all kind of chipped away at the ice and came flooding out of him. And you can tell it's very much that kind of album because there are 3 songs on the album that are based on material he wrote back in like 71 when he was first auditioning for John Hammond.
Yep.
So there's 3 songs that are old Bruce, and you can tell right away because they're verbose as fuck, they're gritty, they're very Dylan-esque, they're classic Bruce lyrics. And the rest are not necessarily as lyrically dense. They don't try to fit in as many things. And I don't want to say they're simplistic, but they're simplified. And I think it's just because it's all of this pouring out of him, and you don't need to, it's putting a hat on a hat to try to change the lyrics too much. I think just those sentiments came out of him. It's a lot like the narration in the documentary. It felt like that's just what came from his brain to the tip of his pen in that moment. He didn't sit and grind and chip away and reform it. It's just what came out. And I think that's what's so fucking cool about him. Like when they were, he was working on Born in the USA and Nebraska. Those songs all came out in like a 2-week blast. Like he just like had this massive epiphany and all this shit just came out. So he's really unique in that regard. He doesn't have to labor over it. He's very tapped into the muse.
Yeah. he's a philosopher. You know, he's like Socrates in a denim jacket. You know, it's like, you know, it's this way that he can just put words down, you know, where you never feel like he's talking down to you or that you're supposed to have a hard time understanding it. You know, he's never trying to confuse anybody. You know, he's saying things in a way that makes sense to him in as simple a way as possible. And he just, I think his brain just goes a mile a minute all the time. So there's always just these spurts of creativity that he has where things just flood out of him like it's a waterfall, you know. And like you said, Nebraska and Born in the USA, you know, a lot of Nebraska was supposed to be on Born in the USA. And then I think it was Stevie Van Zandt heard the demos and he's like, no, you just have to release this on its own, you know, when he heard Nebraska. So, you know, it's just one of those things where it's like a lot of times Bruce seems like he's a medium, like he's channeling these things that, you know, he's really not responsible for. You know, it's almost, you know, he's just the conduit through which these themes and ideas are getting presented to us, you know. And I think that's one of the things where I've always thought of, you know, Bruce Springsteen as a person is a totally different thing than Bruce Springsteen as the boss. You know, he's built up this mythical character about himself, but it's all rooted in him, you know. So it's a weird way to try to think about it. You know, with David Bowie, he comes up with Ziggy Stardust, you know, as a completely separate character from himself in order to express what he wants to, you know. With Bruce, it's like he never stepped outside of himself to do that, but it's the same idea. You know, it's these things. He wrote about so many things that he never did himself, like working in factories and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But he knew people that did. He was able to take other people's experiences and channel them through himself to give us all something to relate to. You know, it almost felt like he's been doing us a favor for the 45 years that he's been making this music.
It almost feels like he's been writing our stories. And I'm just going to put a corny caveat at the beginning of this episode. If we say anything and you go, that's really fucking lame, fuck you. I mean every word of it. So, but I like the way you put it, where he's kind of more like a medium or a prophet. And it's less like, okay, let me manufacture something or, you know, come up with this system of values or beliefs that I'm going to put out there and ram down everyone's throat. It's like he's taking from what he sees around him, or honestly, like what he feels. It's like again, it sounds goofy, but this like universal experience that he's somehow able to tap into and put on the page and then eventually record. So he makes very political statements with his music. I mean, Born in the USA, obviously one. There's a couple on this one that are very like political, but it's never like you're a fucking douchebag if you don't think this. He's capturing all sides of the zeitgeist. He's saying like, this is why some people feel this way. This is why some people feel the exact opposite way. This is kind of, you know, and somewhere in the middle lies the truth. So it's less like, if you're a Trump supporter, go fuck yourself, and more trying to explain why someone would support Trump. There's a song on here that's about that, like, spoiler to jump forward to it, but it's about the psychology of why someone like Trump can be successful without ever name dropping him and without necessarily casting aspersions on the people, definitely on a charlatan like Trump, but he doesn't really stand in judgment of ordinary people. And there's another song on here at the end that's about the fucking losers and the outlaws and the whores and everybody. And he again, to kind of carry our religious illusions forward, like as a prophet, Jesus used to eat with, you know, tax collectors and whores. So like Bruce Springsteen doesn't think he's fucking better than anyone. And I think that's what gives such a universality to his music.
Yeah. You know, he's a $500 million man and you would never know it. Yeah. You know, and it's just, and it's funny, you know, when you watch the documentary too, like clearly they're in this super nice studio, like crazy nice. I don't know if it's at his house that he normally lives at, but it's clearly at a ranch.
It's at his
Is
place
that his house?
in Colts Neck, New Jersey. Yeah.
Yeah. So that, you know, and he definitely, you know, if you listen to Western Stars, the album previous to this one, you know, he definitely has always had this kind of fascination with the West and cowboys and, you know, the open range and that kind of stuff, you know, and then you see his house and he's clearly got a stable there, you know, and I know he likes horses. Like that's a thing that he enjoys. So it's like Bruce has never, he's always relevant, but he's never trendy. And it's just a weird thing. Like, you think about any of the music that he's ever made in the time period that he made it, Tunnel of Love in the 80s, very synth heavy album, but sounds nothing like an album by like Flock of Seagulls or another band that was using synths at that time. He never worries about what is musically relevant. He always just plays the music he wants to hear, how he thinks the song is served best. So it's one of the cleverest ways that somebody's music can just stay timeless. It's not like 80s hair metal where it's like you're always going to know that's an 80s hair metal band. Even if that music got made today, like by a band like Steel Panther or somebody that kind of sends it up and goofs on it, what they're doing, but you could really take this album, play it next to like Darkness on the Edge of Town, or play it next to Tunnel of Love, or play it next to like Devils and Dust from the early 2000s, and it's all going to sound pretty similar because he's never worried about what time period he's in. He's just making the music that he thinks sounds right.
Yeah, and I love that working in his favor. And again, it's him trying to make sense of the world around him in order to help the people who listen make sense of it too. But it's not casting aspersions and it's not prescribing anything. It's just like it's exactly what he says in the documentary. I'm in the middle of a 45-year conversation with my fans. I think that is what is so fucking cool about this album.
Yeah, and it feels like it too. So I guess let's get right into, because we could probably wax poetic about The Boss for another 3 hours.
Sure.
But we should do that while also talking about the tracks.
Yes.
So the first song on the album, 1 Minute You're Here. So this is one, if you're familiar with the E Street Band and Bruce's story, Danny Federici, the keys player, and Clarence Clemens, the saxophone player, especially Clarence Clemens, the big man, they're so referenced in so many songs. When they would do their introductions in their live shows, he'd go through and he'd say, Roy Bittan on the bass, or Roy Bittan on the keys, and then, Danny Federici as well. But he'd get to Clarence Clemens and he'd be like, do I even have to say his name? And you can hear the crowd on the live albums go, no. And he'd say it anyway, the big man, Clarence Clemens. But it was always that kind of, he references it in 10th Avenue Freeze Out on Born to Run, Scooter and the big man. He's like, they were the two characters. Clarence was kind of his foil on stage. They played off each other so well. So when Clarence passed away in 2011, I was crushed when that happened. I can't even imagine what it must have been like for Bruce, who this is your musical blood brother for how many years at that point, for 40 years or something like that at that point, So it's just was an extremely sad experience. And to hear him, like write a song like this, knowing what he's talking about, it just adds so many more layers to it, and it's just in the chorus when he says, baby, 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 I'm so alone. Baby, 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 I'm coming home. And it goes along with this album feeling almost like a swan song. And I certainly hope he continues to release music, but this album certainly felt like that, where he was just kind of like, I've said what I needed to say. I'm coming to join you guys. Whether that means he's, that's just spiritually, or he literally means I don't have much time left here. I'm coming to join you soon. It's just a conversation not only with us, but that he's having with these folks that have been part of his life that are no longer here anymore. It's just a really beautiful song.
Yeah, and I mean, mortality haunts this entire album, and the ghosts of very specific people haunt this entire album. I mean that in a good way, but Clarence Clemens, Danny Federici, George Tice, it's just there's been a lot of loss and heartache for E Street and for Bruce Springsteen, and this song, especially as an opener, sets the tone for, okay, well, this is kind of what we're going to explore. We're gonna move back in time. And again, it starts kind of with his childhood. There's this line, I lay my penny down on the rails as the summer wind sings its last song. And he talks about that in the documentary, about like the trains would come down and my friends and I would put pennies on the tracks. And it's just this evocative way that he's like, your penny would get squished and you'd go pick it up and it'd still be hot. And just like stupid kid shit, but the stuff that's imprinted in your mind forever. And it's really a lot of this song too, because it's lyrically and musically simplistic. And again, that's not a dig, but a lot of it, I think, is in the vocal performance. It's this very hushed. I mean, he sounds so old on this song, and that is not a dig either, because another great thing he drops in the documentary is wisdom brings with it a lot of age and a lot of, age brings with it a lot of wisdom and a lot of perspective. And you kind of get it framed that way by hearing this raspy, he barely sounds like himself, like Red River running along the edge of town. When he sings that, he sounds like a real old man. So it's almost like, I don't think he's being performative. I think he's just being introspective and quiet, and that's the sound that's coming out. And I just think, again, he's so dialed in to the content that it came out as this kind of even older Bruce. It's not even 71-year-old Bruce. It's like Bruce looking at his own fucking headstone from beyond the grave kind of thing.
Yeah, it almost seemed like if he never got a chance to make another album or release any more music, he wanted to make sure that this album said what he needed to say. You know, if it is in fact, you know, getting towards the end of, you know, his musical career, and again, I certainly hope it doesn't, but it's really hard to talk about this album without bringing up mortality, without being honest about that. You know, this song really struck me like it could have been on the Ghost of Tom Joad album. You know, the way his voice sounded, the kind of cadence of the lyrics and everything, and that, you know, that's one of those things where it's like, every one of these songs, you could match up with a different era of the boss and how he sounds, and you could fit it right in with something else. And it's just so incredible that, you know, he was able to take basically an entire career, look back on it, and compress it down to 12 songs and make it feel so complete.
Yeah, I mean, it really does. It feels like, again, to go back to my whole Bowie comparison, that is less of him looking back on his life specifically and more of him kind of tinkering with these themes, like I can't give you everything. And it's interesting to watch someone kind of ruminate on themes of death, but not necessarily relate it to themselves the entire time. And then, like we said, Bruce Springsteen is obviously, as far as we know, not terminally ill, but he's really kind of personalized all of this material. And it makes it impossible to turn away. So it's really kind of... he's done something on this album that scares the shit out of me because I don't want him to be done making music. And there is kind of a finality to it. And again, that's going off of nothing. He hasn't said anything about it. But if he decided to go out on top, this is the one to do it with.
Yeah. And I mean, I just, you know, as far as... You know, I think, you know, I still am going to like Born to Run and, you know, Greetings from Asbury Park. You know, those albums are always going to be, I think, just personally more important to me. But as far as my fandom of Bruce Springsteen goes, like, this album is going to be right up there, you know, with some of the most important music that I think people should listen to if they want to get to know who Bruce Springsteen is. You know, it certainly would. It's funny that it's coming towards, you know, obviously the end of his career, but it's one of the best introductions I can think of to his music. You know, just the way that the feelings are so easily accessible. You know, he's not overly wordy like he would get on Greetings from Asbury Park or the Wildly Innocent E Street Shuffle. You know, those albums were when he was still coined as the new Dylan kind of guy. You know, so he felt like I think he put it as, you know, he thought he had to get paid by the word, basically. So he fitted as many of them into the songs as he possibly could. You know, and it's just, I think with this album, it just is such a, you know, it feels like coming home to Bruce again, almost. You know, it doesn't feel like a different Bruce like Western Stars did or the Seeger Sessions did, or even like the Ghost of Tom Joad did. It feels like exactly how Bruce Springsteen should feel. And I don't know how else to really explain that, but every song I think hits the emotional target that it was supposed to. And it's just really, really impressive.
And I think you're correct. It feels like coming home. It's getting the band back together. Literally, this is the first time they all like were in the same place, because this was recorded live over like 4 days with like minimal overdubs. I think it's the first time since Born in the USA, right? That
I think so. Yeah, that was because because after that it was definitely they would be on the albums. Like you'd see
Yeah.
Max Weinberg on the drums getting credit for that, but there was a lot of albums that Steve Van Zandt wasn't on, because he's very, very active himself. And if you haven't looked into like the Disciples of Soul and that kind of thing, for the listeners out there, I'm sure you have, but he's very much a musical and rock and roll purist.
Yeah.
One of the people that really is doing a lot to kind of keep the rock and roll music of the 50s, 60s, and early 70s alive. And it's their relationship has always been kind of weird, because Steve Van Zandt has his own bona fides. He wrote the music for Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes, which was one of those shore bands that came up with Bruce. So Bruce is clearly, obviously, the most famous, successful musician in this band, but Steve Van Zandt has his own qualifications as well. So they always have had kind of a weird kind of relationship with each other, where Steve Van Zandt, I think, is one of the few people in the E Street Band that could really tell Bruce when he thinks something sucks, and Bruce would actually listen to him. And I think they just have that kind of relationship where, they definitely get testy with each other too. They went for about 10 or 12 years hardly talking to each other. So it's there's certainly, has been some bad blood there, but overall, I think they realized that, like in Eddie and the Cruisers, the kind of words and music thing where it's like one without the other just isn't as good. I think they realize that about each other, and they really do push each other to, do better. And it's just really, even on this one, there's, one of the first guitar solos for Steve Van Zandt in the history of the E Street Band on a recorded album happened on this album, 45 years into the E Street Band's career, which is just crazy. But it's just, I don't know. There's so many things about this whole album that just really felt good and right and like it should be, and it didn't feel disappointing whatsoever.
Well, and a lot of it is, again, culmination of feelings and songs and moments, like the guitar solo and these 3 songs from 71 that exist in like little broken demo pieces but never really got released. Jake Clemens, the nephew of Clarence Clemens, getting, I think it was in the documentary, they say, what is it, his first, did they call it his first solo on a Springsteen joint?
I think it was the first time he's been on an E Street album.
Oh, because he joined in 2012, right?
Yeah, so he joined for the Wrecking Ball tour.
And Bruce didn't use E Street
Clarence
from Wrecking Ball onward, right?
No, because that was, and then after that, I think was the Seeger sessions. So he was doing like kind of other types of projects, and he always would like we were saying, he would have the E Street Band on the records, but they wouldn't be billed as the E Street Band. It was always songs written and recorded, by Bruce Springsteen. Then it would, like, certain songs would have each of them. I think Clarence probably was the one that was of the E Street Band members. I think Clarence and Max Weinberg were probably the ones that were on the most albums as far as credits go. But it's just, it's the whole story of the E Street Band is just incredible. How Clarence passes away, but he had been the one to teach his nephew how to play saxophone. So it's like you lose Clarence, but there's still that spiritual connection with him. There's still like, it's almost, it's just, it definitely, when I was seeing the Wrecking Ball tour and saw Jake Clemens come out and play the solo for Jungle Land, after they went through this whole montage where, you were wondering what they were going to do to replace Clarence. And then they bring out Jake Clemens and he absolutely rips it. And it just, I remember with so many tears in my eyes, how incredible a moment that was. I think that was the closest thing to a religious experience I've ever had in my life, was at a Bruce Springsteen concert, so it's just, really, I don't know. It's just, it's hard to put into words how much this album kind of means to me already, 5 days old, and just how much it's going to be put right along there with, Born to Run and Greetings from Asbury Park, and these albums that I have listened to back to front hundreds of times in my life, knowing that this one is going to probably get right up there with those is just really incredible.
And again, I love the cool touches, like it's Jake Clemens paying tribute to his uncle, but also like it's your time to inherit this mantle and do your own thing. And then I think it's Bataan is at the Glockenspiel and Bruce Springsteen is like, play it like Danny Federici. Like,
yeah,
his ghost is haunting this album. I think that's a direct quotation. And like, none of that was sad. It was all celebratory. You miss the person, But I think that's the lesson of the album, like to jump ahead, like death is not the end. And it's just like it's celebrating all things Bruce Springsteen, all things E Street, all things music. And like, yeah, the boys are old. The boys are old as shit. But it's not sad and pathetic. And I don't think it is like axiomatically like, oh, if anyone over 65 picks up a guitar, it's a fucking joke. But like you just like it's intercut with all this footage of like young, wiry, scrappy Bruce and like all these guys when they were thin and had hair and stuff. So they're old men now with families and shit. But the second they get in that recording booth, they're fucking ageless. They're timeless. They're right in there like it's, day one. They're really
just
incredible.
as vital as they've ever been. Yeah. And it's and I think they're as good as they've ever been. I mean, it's just, and I mean, and I feel like music is one of the few things where, you don't lose it when you get older. It's vocally you might if you've pushed your voice past where it should go for decades and decades. Yeah, Meatloaf. But as far as like playing guitar, playing piano, as long as you don't end up getting like arthritis or something kind of debilitating like that, you're always going to get better because you're always going to find new ways to play something. Maybe you found an easier way to play something, so it's just, these guys have had now, just in the E Street Band, 45 years. But before that, they were all playing music too. So it's like, they're all probably at 60 years of musical experience with each of them, so it's just, you hear that, you hear how good they are when you watch the documentary and you see Nils Lofgren and Steve Van Zandt figuring out who's going to capo where, who's going to play the open chords on guitar, who's going to play, the barred chords, just to figure out the voicings that they're using so that they layer instead of just duplicating, and sounding like a live overdub. Basically, they layer together. So it's the same, it's like playing, you're playing a C note in a low octave and they're playing the same note in a higher octave. So it'll sound good. And it's like they're harmonizing with their guitars. It's like a really, really incredible thing to witness in the documentary, and then to hear on the album. It just sounds so big. It just sounds so full.
And I get such a fucking boner for that kind of stuff because like you and me and all of our friends, like we're a bunch of ham and eggers who love music and play music, but we've had those moments too where you just sit and it's like, the bass player and the drummer are like, okay, well, we got to make sure that rhythmically we're doing this, or the vocalist is like, oh, fuck, I don't know, I can't fit all of these syllables into this one line. It's a fucking train wreck. And just like the individual work that goes into it, the group work that goes in as a whole, and then the little combinations within there. It's just these little pockets of magic where like one or more people figure something out and it just fucking clicks. It's so special to watch. It's special to be a part of, even though, again, we're small potatoes, but it's the same kind of magic. And I don't think they would look at us cross-eyed for fucking saying that either. Because another theme of this album is music is the uniting force.
Yeah. And it just is really, when it comes through, if you follow like Steve Van Zandt on Twitter, he's very, very active on Twitter. And he'll just engage with anybody. If they have questions about, certain bands back in the day, he'll talk about why he loved them, and it's not just to try to say that he knows more about music than you do. He wants you to know as much as he does, so he wants to share that knowledge. And I felt like this whole album, that's what the entire E Street Band was doing. They were like, we've spent all of these decades learning all of these things, like going through all of these things. It's time that we share it with everybody, and it felt just like, I don't know. It felt different than any of his recent albums have. Like, it really felt like he wasn't writing this one necessarily for Bruce Springsteen and that's it. Like, he wasn't just trying to get his creative juices out there. He was writing this because he knows he's part of something bigger. He knows that it's Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, but nobody is ever going to think of Bruce Springsteen without the E Street Band. Clearly everybody knows he is the creative driving force behind them, but there's a reason we know all their names too.
Yeah.
There's a reason that Steve Van Zandt has a very successful career on his own as a radio host, as well as in bands. there's a reason Max Weinberg was part of Conan O'Brien's show and gets asked to be guest on albums all the time. It's because these are musicians at the top of their game and have been for decades now. So it's really, they are a super group. They just have never left the original group. They just started as one.
A fucking men. And I think we've kind of gone on an extended little walkabout here on just the first track. But that's all stuff I wanted to talk about too, that I think, that first song kind of sets up. So do you want to scoot to Letter to You? Do you have anything else to say about this one?
No, that we can do that. And I mean, I think we knew this was going to happen. That's why we decided this episode was just going to be this album. So Letter to You, this was the first single that he released. And I think when it came out, we went over it and we both kind of said it sounded like kind of cheesy, but it was still great. It was still very clearly a Bruce and the E Street song. And when you watch the documentary, that added a entire different level to this song. It stopped being cheesy for me and became exactly what it is. He's trying to find out how to get these feelings out to folks that are not around anymore. He's like, how do I let them know how I'm feeling? And in a very Bruce Springsteen way, he wrote them a letter, and it kind of starts out where he can't figure out, when he's trying to figure out how to say these things, he says, "'Neath a crowd of mongrel trees, I pulled that bothersome thread." That bothersome thread being like he's wearing a sweater, and that sweater is made of all of those emotional blockages that he's had trying to deal with these folks not being around anymore. Maybe the relationships of the folks that are still around that are kind of broken, that he wishes were repaired. And it's just a really good song where it's just him saying, I really have struggled to find the words to talk to you about these things, but here they are. I finally found them. Here they are.
Well, first of all, I got to do a little bit of this. Nom, 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 nom. That's me eating crow, because I was super lukewarm on the song when it came out as a single. I remember being like, it's all right. I mean, it's Bruce Springsteen. It's like pizza. Even the kind of not best you've ever had is still a fucking treat. But I mean, the number of times that I've consumed this album, I've invented fucking harmonies to the chorus that I sing in the shower now. So this is an objectively great song. And again, it's exactly what you're saying. It's a letter to these people that he's lost. How can you contextualize what they mean to you, the things you want to say, the debt you owe them, particularly the members of the Castiles? These are people that were so formative in you becoming the musician, the star that you became. So now they're all gone and you're the last one, and the most prolific one. How do you kind of take on that debt and pay it back? How do you do this? I think it's him kind of wrestling with that, but also the letter is to us as well. It's him expressing himself and saying hey, maybe it's a weird thing to just talk at length about all of my dead friends that you maybe never heard of. Obviously big time E Street homers, no Clarence Clemens and Federici and all that, but who's very familiar with the Castiles
or Terry McGovern, has to get mentioned, was Bruce's manager for a long time. And he also wrote a song called Terry's Song for him that was on the Magic album as well.
Interesting.
So that it's, like I said, sorry to jump in. Keep going with with your thought there.
No,
I didn't really have anything. I just wanted to make sure we mentioned him because, Bruce, is very important to Bruce. So, should be mentioned along with everybody else too.
No, totally. And that's a good stop, because that's exactly my point is, I think, again, this idea of what debt do I owe the people who got me to this point is making sure that death is not the end for them. They're not just a name on a stone that some guy in Teaneck, New Jersey has to weed whip around every couple of months. These are people that I want to enter the fabric of the public consciousness because they love me. They can quote my songs backwards and forwards, and they wouldn't have that if not for these other people. So I think that's incredibly important point to make, actually.
Yeah. And it really is, this was one of those ones where I ate my fair share of crow on this one too. Cause I think I said right on the podcast that I was like, yeah, it's good, but it's kind of cheesy. It's it's Bruce, so we're glad to have it, but it's didn't think it was his best. And then you put it in context with the rest of the songs on the album, and it's just, it's heartbreaking, but hopeful at the same time,
Yeah.
like so many of his best songs, and it's just, it really is something, it's very simplistic. I mean, he says, tried to summon all that my heart finds true and send it in my letter to you. He's saying, he's not talking about very specific instances or anything like that, but knowing, when you watch the documentary and you look into the history of the E Street Band a little bit, you understand these folks that have been huge parts of it that are now no longer around, and it's just, I think he's always felt like he didn't deserve where he is. And I think that, some of the best artists on the planet have always felt that way. That's part of that creative force that keeps driving them forward. Otherwise they just stop after like 2 great albums and they're like, hey, I've done everything I need to do. He's always felt like he was still searching for something, and I think all these folks along the way were the ones that have helped him find it. And I think maybe on this album, he finally did find it. He finally has found the purpose of what he was doing this whole time, was to bring joy to us, the fans, to bring joy to the people around him, which happen to be, his bandmates, his wife, who's also in the band, Patti Scialfa. But it's just, it seems like with this one, he's like, I've figured this out. I've figured out what my purpose is here. And I have to thank you for being part of my walk to here. It's just a really just kind of poignant song, and certainly contrasted drastically from what I originally thought about it, and it just is a really, I'm happy to eat crow on this one. I'm so happy that, I've really looked into it, put it in context with the rest of the album, and really understood where he was going with this one.
Oh, crow never tasted so good, baby. Like, context is very important, because when I first heard it, I'm like, oh, okay. So it's an old guy writing a fucking letter to probably a woman. It's probably a May-December thing, blah, blah, blah. And I like projected all of this weird, like, boomer self-image shit onto it. And I'm like, this is just a very weirdly tone-deaf song in certain ways. Like, not to totally shit on it, but I remember being like, I'm a little measured in my enthusiasm, because it's just like, I'm going to write how I feel and send it in a letter to some girl, like some woman, like, okay. But then you see it's just so much more than that. And you're like, no, I'm fucking stupid as shit, which is why I don't make these fucking albums. And I'm
it just felt like a big old dummy. It just felt like a big old dummy. Of course, Bruce was going to be smarter than me with one of these things, because when I originally heard the song, I'm thinking he's writing this to a specific person. Like, he's got a specific person in mind that he's writing this directly to. And then you figure out that the you is like the, just the kind of general you,
the royal
like you as the fans, like you as the people around me. It's just, basically he's writing it to everybody but himself. It's kind of a cool way to look at it.
Yeah. And I got to say too, I peeping some of my little notes here. You really don't realize until you're in the thick of it, just how much the organ and the keys, salt and pepper E Street songs, man. Just that little, like, these little, like, subtle blips that they add that, like you were saying before with the layering of the guitars, just fills out the sound and makes it jump. I don't want to say jump off the page, because it's not a book, but that kind of imagery, it puts it in another dimension. Like, I can't remember if I've talked about this before or not. I think maybe on the pod, but there's a very specific album that we'll review someday, because I got to go back and see if it's as meaningful when I'm sober. But I microdose mushrooms and listened to this album, and it made the sound feel very textured, like I had stuck my brain into the middle of like a 3D model. So it just like had a very vibrant, thick, fully dimensional sound. And without being on fucking a small dose of mushrooms, this song has that same ability. It just, it's so full back to front. It's really kind of amazing.
What was the album that you were talking about?
The artist name is Caliucci's, and I forget the name of the album. I think it's called Isolation, actually, now that I think about it.
So fiance of the pod, Marla, her sisters really love Caliucci's.
Yeah.
So I've heard a decent amount of them. Yeah. I think they played at the ACL Fest like last year or the year before or something like that. And they went, like, that was one of the artists that they were specifically going to see. So yeah, well, I'm down with doing a Caliucci's album for sure.
Awesome.
For sure. So I guess we move it right along to Burn and Train. This one is the one where I think the E Street Band gets rocking to its full power for the first time on the album. And boy, howdy, is it a good one. It's just a really, I don't know. I don't know what era to really kind of put this one in, but you know immediately that it's a Bruce song. Like, that's one thing that he's always so good at, is you're always going to know when it's a Bruce Springsteen song. And it's just the first verse, zero's my number, time is my hunter. I wanted you to heal me, but instead you set me on fire. You know, and it's just so those classic Bruce lines, which are so over the top, you know, like they didn't literally set him on fire, but he's talking about emotionally, spiritually, that person, that interaction with them changed him. You know, it propelled him, turned him into something else. You know, it burned away what he was before it, and he became, what emerged was a new Bruce. You know, and it's just a really, you know, classic Springsteen theme, you know, which is this kind of Phoenix from the ashes kind of thing. But again, just does it with the perspective of this being kind of, you know, a retrospective album, you know, looking back on his career. You know, this one takes on a different meaning than all those other songs, even though it still would fit right along with them. And
totally agree, especially with the whole transformative message of the song. This musically is quintessentially blistering. Just the guitar work, the organ work, the fact that it moves like a train, which seems like a very simple thing, but it's something more people than you would think would miss. So they write a song like, you know, I'll make one up, like, you know, fucking Train to Your Love. And they don't take any pains to try to work in like a train motif to the song, which is a missed opportunity. And that's not something that Bruce Springsteen is going to miss. But it just captured, I mean, Burnin' Train. It's literally like a fucking freighter from hell, belching fire, barreling down on you. But instead of you being like, oh, fuck, I'm going to die, you're like, oh, fuck, I'm going to die. It's like this, like Viking sex on a burning ship. I personally, when I look at the lyrics, interpret it to be about Patty Scialfa, because he was married before, and Tunnel of Love is about how much he was fucking miserable in that marriage, wasn't he? Wasn't it?
Yeah.
So it really seems like after that dark period, meeting Patty Scialfa, whatever, that like it says right here, I wanted you to heal me, but instead you set me on fire. I was hoping that I would meet someone who was going to make me forget about these shitty circumstances and feel a little better about myself. And instead of that, I became a completely different person because of you. And that's how I knew you had staying power. It's kind of a fucking amazing message. And if it's like they say in Yacht Rock when they're talking about Rosanna, I sure wish I knew the girl that song was about.
It's true. And, you know, he says, you know, another line where it goes right along with that theme is, with our shared faith rising dark and decayed, take me and shake me from this mortal cage. Where it's, you know, he's saying like, help me find a better me kind of thing, you know, where he's like, I've got all these problems in my life. I've got all these things, like, help me burn them away. Like, let me on your train. Like, let me go with you. And it's just, it's one of the things that Bruce Springsteen does too, where he never claims to have it all figured out, but he certainly sounds like he's got more answers than any of the rest of us, you know, and you know, he's very much, you know, and like I had said before we started recording, I've been watching a lot of that Cobra Kai show. It's very much a Mr. Miyagi kind of thing, where it's like, he's going to give us the wisdom, but it's up to us to figure out what it means to us and how we apply it to our own. Yeah, exactly. And it's, you know, he's such a wise person at this point in his life. And, you know, he even says it in the documentary that he wouldn't have been able to write these songs. You know, most of them, you know, 3 of them he did, but a lot of these songs he wouldn't have been able to write back in the 70s because he didn't have the life experience, you know, and getting something that sounds as vital as he did on those albums, you know, the mid 70s albums like Darkness on the Edge of Town and Born to Run, and then even into the 80s with Born in the USA, you know, as vital as he sounded on those albums, you know, he sounds just as vital here, but he's got a whole new perspective. And to be able to do that is just one of the most impressive things I think I've heard in music in recent memory.
Completely agree with that. And it's, again, just I'm specifically interpreting it because in my mind it fits thematically. I'm specifically interpreting it as being about his wife, because if you're going to do a retrospective of your life and you're still happily married, that person's going to factor in. That's especially when she changed his world. I mean, had children with him, completely changed his fucking world and his perspective. You can't leave that off the album. And even just like very I hate to say simplistic because it sounds insulting, but very simple stuff that like you could have an image like a black knight with a sword of fire. I mean, there's stuff on here like, on your bed of thorns, I brought you shining gifts, wiped the sweat from your brow and I touched your lips. Like, that's great imagery. But even something as simple as, I ran my fingers across the hollow of your stomach as you lay breathing. Think about the image of that act. Just literally like laying on a fucking blanket, just like tracing your fingers on her fucking stomach because her shirt rode up a little bit. It's this little tiny moment that probably means nothing to anybody else, but to him is one of those electric feelings between them. You can't write a song like this if you don't fucking love that person. So it's like hard to like, I sound like a crazy person ranting about it because it's the spirit of the song. You listen to it and you feel that. It's like, holy shit, where's my Patty?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're both just as crazy about this album as he is about Patti Scialfa. So
yeah,
good work, Bruce. So I think moving on to this next one. Now, this is one that I don't know if you knew that this song was going to be on the album or anything like that, but you have referenced this song, by Warren Zevon several times on the pod previous to this. So tell me, did you know?
I did know. Friend of the pod, Tanner, when he found out the album was coming out, went, dude, he's finally going to do Janie Needs a Shooter. Because like I've talked about before, the broad strokes are, it was a Bruce song. Warren Zevon did it as Jeannie Needs a Shooter. But I have all my notes here because this is a song 50 years in the making. And I'm a huge homer for Warren Zevon. I'm a huge homer for Jeannie Needs a Shooter. So it's kind of an interesting story. So the earliest incarnation of Janie Needs a Shooter was a song called Talking About My Baby, which was like a 1971 cut. And then Bruce Springsteen took it and kind of changed it to be a little more brooding. And it was one of the songs that he brought to this guy, John Hammond, who was a legendary talent scout. I mean, Billie Holiday, Aretha Franklin, Benny Goodman, all of these people. He was specifically interested in promoting the music of African Americans because he knew beyond what was called the Chitlin circuit that there wasn't going to be a ton of mainstream exposure for them. So he had a extremely probably unrealistic but laudable goal, which was like, we can end racism with a song. It's like, A for effort. But he really kind of exposed these black artists to the mainstream. And he was a guy who really had his finger on the pulse of what people were doing that was different and people were going to take notice. He was big on taking chances on people. So Bruce Springsteen has this opportunity to audition for him, and he's calling together these songs. And one of them ends up being Janie Needs a Shooter. And he was going to put it on, I don't think it was going to be included on Asbury Park, but I think Wild the Innocent, the E Street Shuffle, and then I think Born to Run, where he considered putting on all of those, and it just never materialized. So fast forward to 1976, 77, it was around the time he was having a dispute with someone from the label, so he was like banned from the recording studio.
Yeah, Mike Appel.
Yes, Mike Appel. So Zevon was talking to a mutual friend, and he heard about the title of this song, and he was like, oh, that's very interesting. And he went up to Bruce Springsteen and was like, will you just play me this song? Like, I'm really, like, he, first of all, misheard it as Jeannie instead of Janie. He's like, I really like this, like, Jeannie Needs a Shooter thing. I'm really intrigued.
It's probably the drugs.
Yeah, probably. He thought that Bruce Springsteen was like Satan. Hey, man, I'm talking to the devil. So he went up to Bruce and was like, I got to hear this song. And Bruce Springsteen was like, this thing is the bane of my fucking existence. So to end the conversation, he was like, you know what, Warren? Why don't you just go work on your own version, okay? So Warren Zevon pops off and ends up creating his own version that he played for Bruce during the River sessions. And he got Bruce hooked, and Bruce was like, I like what you have so far. Where's the rest of it? Because he really only had one verse. So they ended up working on verses together, and he gifted Warren unused parts of the chorus to really flesh it out. So that inspired Bruce Springsteen to try again, but it just never made it. I think the last known mention of it was like session logs from 1974. There was a full band arrangement, and that was like the last time it was really attempted. So anyway, Warren Zevon ends up creating this song, and it's at the top of I forget the name of the album, unfortunately, because it's this long, drawn-out thing. Whatever. Boner move on my part. How big of a Zevon fan can he really be? But so it ends up being this really great Warren Zevon song, and Bruce Springsteen just doesn't touch it for the longest fucking time. And now, 50 years later, here we go. Here we are. Finally here. And it did not disappoint. I haven't lived 50 years, but if it took 50 years for us to get it, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, this one is just, and it's funny that he said it wasn't going to fit with other things, because this to me like would fit right in on Greetings from Asbury Park.
Or Born to Run.
Or Born to Run. I think Born to Run just like thematically, I don't know if there's, because it's like kind of a really violent song almost, you know what I mean? Like, so I don't know how much it would have fit with that. It certainly could have. Like, I mean, Bruce could do whatever he wants and I'd be fine with it. But, when you look at a song like Lost in the Flood, there's literally, it's about a riot that takes place and like a cop shoots a Spanish kid, so it's like, there's certainly violent things that happen on that album and certainly in other songs as well on there. But it's like, why, I'm just not sure why he wouldn't have thought this one fit. Maybe they just couldn't get it right musically, but lyrically, I mean, this would fit right in with that album. And it's just, it's a really clever kind of song where he definitely focuses on the character Janie, and it's like nobody in her life is there for anything but to try to take advantage of her, and it's just a really kind of heavy song, but I think it's probably more relevant now than it would have been if he had released it back then, with the whole Me Too movement and everything like that. I think this song is a lot more relevant now than it would have been. And maybe it would have gotten kind of lost to history if he never just gave it up to Warren Zevon and put it on the shelf for himself for 40 years or whatever it was.
I mean, it takes as long as it takes to ferment, right? And they got the formula right. It's just like the lyrics are so fucking, they're quintessential old school Bruce, but they're so like sexually graphic, because the story is essentially about this girl, and it's unclear how because it's from the perspective of a male narrator, it's unclear how she feels about her promiscuity and her many different sexual relationships. But the thing they all have in common is people that are obsessed with her body and possessing her sexually, but they offer her nothing intellectually, emotionally, romantically. And the narrator is kind of like, I see you for you. You're not just, to be vulgar, an assortment of holes. So like, I value you for your soul, for the person you are, and you need someone like me on your side. I mean, that's the chorus. Janie needs a shooter like me on her side, someone who knows her style, and I know her style. And it's not just like, I want to be the latest one to get in there, because it kind of implies they've already got a relationship and he's just waiting for her to come to terms with the fact that these other guys are not right for her. And you talk about it being a violent song. There's actually a fourth verse that was cut, because there's three different suitors, and we'll talk about them. There's the doctor, the priest, and the cop. But there was a fourth verse that was originally in it that was about a mechanic who beats the fuck out of Bruce with a tire iron, and when Bruce is like, why? He's like, it's you or me, and it ain't gonna be you, bitch. And like, I must have her, so I'm gonna beat the fuck out of you, so you're not gonna be pretty no more. So it's a pretty intense song.
Yeah, and like subject wise is definitely, I mean, he probes with his fingers but knows her heart only through his stethoscope. There's some really, really graphic things. And again, it's almost like it was meant to be for this song to be so delayed in coming out in his career, because I think the time period that we're in now, where there's still, there's finally so much, consciousness and attention brought to the fact that, women have been treated so unfairly throughout history, basically, just for the fact that they're women. I think this song coming out now makes it more relevant than it would have been, and I think it's just a really, if it was an intentional thing for him just to be like, I'm going to save it for when it means something, or if it just happened to be that he remembered that it existed for this album and was like, oh, we'll give it a shot. We're the best we've ever been musically. So like, let's see if we can get this one nailed now. But it just worked out that way, as it kind of always seems to for Bruce.
Yeah. Lucky fucker. Yeah. And I think you're right. It is a perfect time for it. And again, intentionally or unintentionally. And it's another one of those things that shows us we've come a long way, but there's still a lot of work left to do. Mm-hmm. And it's Bruce doing it with a deft touch because, and I mean, it's graphic and like a fucking pipe to the side of the head when you really dig down. But it's just the way that he can phrase stuff. Janie's got a doctor who tears apart her insides. He investigates her and silently baits her size, probes with his fingers, but he knows her heart only through his stethoscope. His hands are cold and his body's so old. Janie turns him down like dope. So it's clearly just this person who's completely incapable of loving her. It sounds like he's probably well endowed and is, perfectly willing to come over and lay some pipe. But he has no interest in starting a relationship. Mm-hmm. And you never really know how she feels about it. You've got the narrator's version of it, which in and of itself, again, intentional or unintentional, is very interesting because we're getting a man's perspective on, well, clearly Janie, what she needs, according to me, if I can mansplain what her needs are, is she needs a fella who's going to treat her right. It's entirely possible that she feels very liberated and is like, no, I like getting laid. I don't like that the cop character, the third suitor, is a violent stalker who shows up to my fucking house, like trying to peek in the windows when he sees that you're over here. But she could just, when she talks about the priest, with her doors wide open, she begs, come inside. So it sounds like she's a willing participant in all of this, but we're left to wonder, what is her mental state? So it's interesting to only get the male narrator's speculation on it. So that kind of makes the song more complex to me.
Yeah, it definitely just screams early Bruce with the perspective of, having a single character, putting himself in as the narrator. It definitely screams early Bruce Springsteen. There's not a lot of philosophical things that are happening in this song, and it's just a very, very good one. I'm glad he finally did it. I wish Warren was alive still to be able to finally hear the song, that he wanted to hear for so long. But, I think, he's up there somewhere in the ether listening right now, I'm sure.
Well, funny anecdote about that too. So all Warren Zevon really heard was the title, which he not only fucked up, it's Janie, and he thought it was Jeannie, but he just hears, oh, Jeannie needs a shooter. And he goes off and he writes this epic poem about an outlaw who falls in love with a sheriff's daughter and ends up getting killed as he tries to run for the border with her. And maybe I'm interpreting this, but I also think she was probably underage in the context of the song. Yeah. So he writes this epic poem about the outlaw and the sheriff's daughter, and he presented it to Bruce Springsteen, and Bruce was like, oh, yeah, so here's what I had in mind. And apparently Warren Zevon was fucking mortified. He's like, how did I misinterpret this so completely? Holy fuck.
I mean, how are you supposed to interpret Jeannie needs a shooter?
Right.
You know what I mean? If I hear that title, like an outlaw in the West, like running from the law, is just as likely as what Bruce wrote about in here. You know what I mean? So it's like, I would almost go to that first. So I guess that's why Bruce Springsteen is worth $500 million, and we still have to tell people who Warren Zevon is,
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's got something to do with it. But and certainly go check out some Warren Zevon. If y'all haven't done it before, he's a weird fucking dude, but man, oh man, did he write some good songs. You've probably heard Werewolves of London, Lawyers, Guns and Money, maybe Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner. He's got so many good ones. Excitable Boy, another great one.
Yep.
It's just, certainly go check out some Warren Zevon. If you're into when musicians get a little weird, he certainly gets a little weird.
Check out the live album Stand in the Fire. I think it's from 80 or 81. The cool thing about that album is Warren Zevon as a studio musician, totally fine. Great. Really enjoyable. But if you really want to hear Warren Zevon music the way it's meant to be heard, with all of that fucking rock and roll machismo squirting through your headphones, Stand in the Fire live album. That's the one to stick with.
I'm glad you said squirting. That was a great way to describe it. That's probably how he'd describe it.
We like to leave our listeners moist and wanting.
And speaking of moist and wanting, we can move on to The Power of Prayer.
Last Man Standing.
Is that the next one?
Yeah.
Oh, I skipped right over it. You are correct. Last Man Standing. Can't believe I would skip over this one. This one was one of my favorite ones on the album. I mean, they were all great, but this one is specifically, I think, about the Castiles and George Thies or Thies. Again, I'm not sure.
I thought they said Tice in the documentary, but I don't know.
Could be. Yeah, that's probably how Stevie Van Zandt and his Jersey accent would probably pronounce it. You know, they probably all pronounce it differently. But it's about that original band where those were like I was saying, Bruce's formative years as a rock and roll musician took place in the Castiles, you know, and from what I understand is very like 50s rock and roll, like, you know, kind of Chuck Berry style, or, you know, even like the Beatles in the late 60s, but that kind of really basic blues based rock and roll, you know, kind of fast paced, probably 2-minute songs that are just really, really good. And it's, you know, he name drops the locations that he was in. You know, he says Knights of Columbus and the Fireman's Hall and the Fireman's Ball, Friday night at the Union Hall, Black Leather Clubs all along Route 9. You count the names of the missing as you count off time. You know, and it's, you know, Bruce's thing is in so many songs, he'll do the 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of thing. You know, and that's something he's done his entire career. And I think he's just referencing that he's like, yeah, this is where I learned to do that, you know, and it's also referencing these folks that are no longer with us, you know, that he owes such a huge debt to for introducing him to this whole thing. Imagine if the Castiles never existed, we may never get the E Street Band. We may never get Bruce Springsteen as he is today. You know, It's just kind of weird to think about that. And it's just a really kind of beautiful tribute to them.
What if Chris Christie had joined the Castiles and Bruce Springsteen was the governor of New Jersey?
Holy shit. Well, the New Jersey probably be better off. I mean, I guess New Jersey's probably pretty decent right now. Their governor's pretty cool, but
I tell you what, we wouldn't have gotten out of Chris Christie was Born to Run.
No. Born to Lay Down.
Born to Sit Quietly.
Born to suck down donuts faster than I can breathe, probably.
Born to pour a small bag of M&Ms into a larger bag of M&Ms. But that's a little wordy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if he was going to be like Bruce, then that's how he would have had to do it, you know. But all the songs would have been about donuts and hot dogs and stuff instead of, you know, love lost and cars.
Yeah, pants ripped and Little Leagues games canceled.
Another part, you know, the chorus of this one is just really, this was when it got to this point in the album, this was where the tears for me started kind of coming down a little bit. Rock of Ages lift me somehow. Somewhere high and hard and loud, somewhere deep into the heart of the crowd. I'm the last man standing now. I'm the last man standing now. And you hear, you know, you read the title, Last Man Standing, and you think about that as like, my immediate thought is to go to like a battle royal kind of thing where it's like, you're all duking it out and it's like the last man standing wins. But he's saying, he's like, I'm the last man standing and I don't feel like I'm winning right now. You know, I wish that these folks were still right here along with me to enjoy this too. And it just was this one was a real heartbreaker of a song for me.
It's the gravity of that hitting him. What I really love about the song is, again, it's definitely one that is an attempt, and a successful attempt, to pay his debts to the Castiles, his first bandmates. It successfully puts them into your memory and paints a picture of what those early days looked like. And it's keeping their memory alive, which is the debt that he owes them. So it takes care of that. But the other cool thing is, until later in the song, but at least for the first part, it's not really from his perspective. It's not him being like, yeah, I remember all the things I was doing when I was on stage and you guys happened to be there. He's very much observing the rest of the Castiles and being like, it's funny how you did this. My heart is warmed by remembering how you did this. And then in the chorus, Rock of Ages, lift me somehow. Something bigger than me, take me out of my fucking body and put me in the middle of the crowd so that I can observe them completely the way that people watched us. And that's when the gravity of that hits him. He's like, fuck, I'm the last one. Like, I am the last man standing out of the Castiles who meant the fucking world to me. And it doesn't really switch back to, like, his perspective to me until Out of School and Out of Work, thrift store jeans and flannel shirts, talking about his image. The lights go down and you face the crowd, the last man standing now. I feel like that's a little moment where he switches back into himself and is like, okay, now it's me, sans Castiles, trying to summon that energy, and it's a lot. And I think it, to me, says this was always present in his mind whenever he performed. He didn't just, like, forget about these guys because they brought him to the dance. Like, they were always with him in spirit and in his music when he was performing.
And they were, I think, an established band when he joined them. So to him, you know, the Castiles were like on the marquee for him, right next to like the Beatles, you know, in the band, in Elvis, and the bands that, you know, he like grew to love music through, you know, and playing that music. It's, you know, think about when you're 16, 17, 18 years old. And that's kind of probably for a lot of people, that's the first time that you're really discovering music on your own versus what your parents are playing for you and maybe some kind of offshoot stuff. So, you know, I remember when I was like 16, that's when I first bought my first Coheed and Cambria album. You know, that's when I stopped really listening to Aerosmith religiously. You know, I'll still listen to them a lot, but, you know, I listen to Aerosmith and Meatloaf and Bruce Springsteen a lot, you know, because of my dad, you know, but when I got to high school and kind of the later years, that's when I started to really discover my own taste in music. So it was like Coheed and Cambria, Death Cab for Cutie, a band called Lucky Boys Confusion from Chicago. So they were all these bands that I really dove into. And I think that's what he's referencing here, is that was his experience with the Castiles. That was his formative time with rock and roll. And imagine like your formative time in rock and roll being the mid 60s.
Right.
You know, cause he's the same age as my dad, you know, so he was born in 1949. So, you know, he was 18 years old in 1967. You know, imagine that, like being 18 years old when the Beatles are the hottest thing on the planet. Bob Dylan has just gone electric. Yeah. Pet Sounds, like Bob Dylan has just gone electric. Like imagine the revolutionary stuff that you were hearing, like Jimi Hendrix, you know, it's like, think about that. You know, the most revolutionary thing that we've heard in our lifetimes, I don't even know what it would be. You know, it's all kind of influenced and a send off from, like, I think probably the most unique thing I've heard in my life is probably Coheed and Cambria. You know, everything else is very directly derived from other types of music. You know, just imagine being Bruce Springsteen, having your eyes opened, and the conduit through which you're doing that is the Castiles. You know, and just think about how important that band is in the history of music. If Bruce Springsteen was the product of them, you know, it's just kind of wild to think about.
Yeah, definitely. It's, you just could never forget them. He would be a much different person. We probably wouldn't be talking about this because if he was that big of an asshole that he could just like walk away from something like that, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. I think a lot of what draws us to Bruce Springsteen is, again, a dangerous word, but his authenticity and the fact that he does not sit in judgment of normal people. He'll definitely, he never punches down. That's a big thing with him. So he's happy to take shots at Trump. He's been very vocal about the Trump administration.
Oh, yeah.
But it's never like, fuck you, Trump voters. And we that's well-worn territory from the beginning of the episode, but he's a very thoughtful person, and that is kind of this song in a nutshell. He could have made it about like, yeah, I knew I was gonna hit it big when I was playing with those guys. What the fuck was their name? I don't fucking know. It was some rinky-dink piece of shit thing, but I knew I was getting all the pussy when the fucking day was over, so yeah. Fuck you guys. Like, I don't need to hear that. It's very refreshing to hear him wax poetic about them and not even necessarily what they meant to him. There's elements of that for sure, but it's really just like, let me give them the stage. Let me raise them up and just let me sit with you guys and enjoy them. And I think that's why it's such a fucking powerful song. But that and the fucking chorus, just that Rock of Ages lift me somehow. This like how fucking Wagnerian the vocals get, where he's just fucking pure Bruce, baby.
And
Tighten
I feel
those
like his
dungarees.
voice was better on this album than it has been in years.
Oh, he sounds amazing.
Yeah, just I think he sounds about as good as he ever did, even into like the albums that he came out with in the late 80s. I mean, just as far as his, maybe he's just learned better how to use the voice that he has left. But he's never been like an otherworldly incredible singer like you would think of like an Aretha Franklin or somebody like that, that has that just crazy loud vocal talent. But he always is very good about singing the right way and the right emotions and everything like that. But I think as far as just his vocal ability and stuff, this is probably the best I've heard him in a long, long time.
Yeah, definitely.
Long time.
And again, he's really good at like the lyrics. If someone's learning, one of the most valuable pieces of advice I got throughout my vocal training was you can look at something on the page and it'll be written, quarter note, whole note. But if you just do like ba 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 ba, like right on the beat, it has no fucking soul. But if you kind of sing it like you'd say it, and don't go nuts and fuck up the entire orchestration, but if you can kind of make it sound more conversational and more natural, it's the night and day difference. Like you just hear someone who gets up and does that. I don't know why I'm thinking of this song from Peter Pan, but I got a crow. I'm just the cleverest about that to know. Like I think of the way Jonah Hill does that song in 21 Jump Street.
Yeah.
How it's just like bop, 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 bop. And it's like, it just sucks. It's supposed to suck, but like a lot of people do. They're just like on the beat and they don't really take any chances with, you miss out. You leave so much emotion on the table if you can't make it feel conversational. And it's confessional for Bruce. You know what I mean? You just see him hitting his fucking knees and being like, take me away. Let me experience this again.
Yep. Yeah. Just a really, really good song. That was certainly one of the heavier ones on the album, but when I watched the documentary and he was going through how he wrote this song, I mean, tears were flowing for sure. Done. I mean, just to think about, how important they were to him and how important he is to me. And like, I feel like I've lost them too, so he's so good at that to, have basically fused himself into American life, at this point with how relevant he's been for so many years. And just, you feel it right along with him, and he's so good at letting you in to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now moving on to The Power of Prayer. Now this one is, I think, again, like kind of a throwback to, his early years, where he's talking about, how he started when he was still that gunslinger Bruce, and it's just a really kind of solid way to say, the power of prayer. I think we talked about, on the last episode, like the universal heart, and then I was talking about the Tyler Childers song, Universal Sound. It's that idea that music is this thing that can connect everybody. It's the universal language.
No, that's Esperanto, Jeff.
Oh, sorry. My mistake. And that's what he's saying. The power of prayer to him is the power of music, is the power of a collective experience in music, and how spiritual that can be. And having had probably the closest thing to a real religious experience at a Bruce Springsteen concert, I completely understand where he's coming from. Is like, you just get in this moment with these people that you're watching. If you're at a concert, you just feel this moment where you're like, this is a moment in my life. This is a moment in time that I'm never going to experience again, but I'm here with all these people right now. And it's just that connection that you get that you can't replicate, you can't duplicate. And it's hard to put into words, but he does it here. It's just very strange how he's able to do it.
Well, and he's got to come up at least once on the podcast, or it's not out on that line. But I had a similar religious experience seeing Elvis Costello with Tanner on my birthday last year. I went into like a fucking fugue state because he played this song, Brilliant Mistake, that Tanner and I both love. And it's like very understated, but really powerful. And as we were walking in, we're like, what do you think he's going to play? What do you think he's going to play? And hoping he would play this. And he did it like 6 songs in. And I just remember we were close enough that you could make out all the features on his face, and just like watching him. And he's in this like white linen suit. and he's got this like super old school looking mic, and he's singing this fucking song. And I just remember it was the most present I felt in a really long time. I'm not thinking about anything else. I'm barely thinking about the fact that I'm seeing Elvis Costello. I'm like fully experiencing this moment. It's transcendent. He's as good as he ever was. He's playing one of my favorites. I feel like I'm rising out of my seat and like becoming one with the force, which in this case is his music. It was fucking trippy. You would have thought I microdosed that night. I didn't. But it was
Maybe you did.
And I just didn't know it.
Yeah.
Maybe I have.
He released those chemicals for you.
He just doses his audience. That'd be amazing. Just mushroom gas out through the vents. And Tanner and I were easily the two most enthusiastic people there. There were people there that have been listening to him since he put out his first album, but nobody had the depth of knowledge and appreciation that Tanner and I did. We were like bouncing up and down in our fucking seats, man. We were going nuts, making a spectacle. But to me, that's what the power of prayer, this song is really about, is there's a magic to music, and most people have a deep affinity for it. You have a favorite song. I think it's a rare person who doesn't like music. I don't fucking trust someone when they're like, yeah, I don't really like music. I'm like, okay, psycho. But
yeah, weird.
Most people have at least an artist or a song that they've got this affinity for. And when you can allow yourself to be swept up in something like music, which is its own kind of magic and spirituality, it feels like anything is possible. And when you feel like anything is possible, you are way more willing to take a chance. It's like in religion. You have faith in this force that you can't see, but you can feel. So a lot of the lyrics in this song, dreamy afternoon neath the summer sun. We'd lie by the lake till the evening comes. I run my fingers through your sun-streaked hair. Baby, that's the power of prayer. To me, like, I interpret that as there's music brought us here, and maybe there's music in this moment, and we're only here through the power of prayer, which in this case is our belief in music. It's what unites us. It's what makes us take chances. It's an otherworldly force that you can't really, interpret.
Yeah, and I think, one of my favorite Bruce Springsteen quotes ever is he learned more from a 3-minute record than he ever learned in school. And it's one of those things where it's like this song kind of brings that out too, where it's like he's probably learned more about people playing his concerts and interacting with his fans than he ever learned otherwise, and it's that kind of thing where it's like, may not be strictly a song or music that, or something specific like that brought them together. But he's like, I've got this career because of music. So all these connections I have with people is because of music, so it's to him, that's his greatest religion. Basically, it's like, that's the religion that he's a part of with all of his fans. He's like, we're all here for the same reason. At his concerts, if you have and again, like, he's probably not going to go on a lot more tours here, people. So if you have the opportunity to go see Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band live, you have to do it. If you are a music fan, you have to do it, because there is no other experience that I've had in my life that even compares to what it was like to see him live and to be a part of that, because the power of prayer. You're there with everybody else worshiping at the altar of the E Street Band. You're there experiencing these things with everybody, and it definitely takes you to a different place. You become a part of something bigger than yourself, if only just for that night. And it's a really incredible experience, and I cannot recommend enough going to see him live if you have the opportunity. I know I'm certainly going to, as much as, I'm definitely going to be dragging fiance the pod Marla along with me, and she's probably going to see me cry my eyes out for about 3.5 hours the whole time. It's just, I really can't stress enough what it's like to see him live. And this song kind of puts it in perspective, where it's like all these little life experiences that you have with other people. It's like, it's that connection, and if it's through music, then that's your prayer, that's your religion, then that's how you've connected with them. Those are the important things, and that's what you need to hold on to.
Yeah. Now, all of that being said, I do have to make an observation. This is not a criticism. This is purely an observation. And I told you I would do this earlier. I need to get my little videos out here. Okay. So this is the power of prayer. The beginning of it.
Dreamy afternoon neath the summer sun. We lie by the lake till the evening comes.
Now let's listen to the beginning of Last Man Standing.
Faded pictures in an old scrapbook. Faded pictures that somebody took.
I went and sat at my piano and wrote down all the notes to these opening lines. And I also looked at like the intervals. And again, this is where I wish my music theory was a little more solid. But they both follow the same basic pattern where it's like bop, 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 bop. Like incredibly similar. I think it's like a minor seventh, a perfect third, diminished seventh, something like that. But they both follow this incredibly similar pattern. And we were talking earlier about little Steven probably has the most stroke to be like, hey, man, just saying, maybe if we did this. I'm a little surprised he didn't catch that and go, you put in these two songs back to back on the album, and they kind of have the same flow to the verses. I think they're obviously in different keys. I think one's in like D sharp and one's in C. But it's just, I had to point it out. They're remarkably similar to the point where when I threw it on shuffle before I knew the album real well, I wasn't sure which one was coming on. I'm like, is this fucking repeating these songs? And then I finally caught on. I'm like, oh no, he just kind of like dipped into the bag of tricks twice on this one.
Yeah.
So again, not a criticism. I can't do what he does. Just an observation.
Yeah, he just got away with it. So I think what he does as well is he may have been, when he was writing the album, he may have been writing these two songs together, thinking that he was coming up with one. And then when he realized that he had enough material that he couldn't really put it in just one song, he probably split them up.
I could see that.
Because he's done that. He's done that several times in the past. That's the same, same thing he did with Born in the USA and Nebraska. Is he realized he'd written all of these songs, and then he realized he's like, well, they can't all be on one album, so he released it separately. So I think he very much is like just kind of goes where it takes him. He doesn't sit down and be like, okay, I'm going to write a 3-verse song with 2 choruses, a bridge, and then an outro. Like I don't think he ever has that in mind. I think he just goes with whatever he's writing, and he probably realized he had way too much material. And he was like, you know what? That's a fucking great melody line, so I'm going to leave that one as is.
Well, and also, I mean, when you're as prolific as he's been, I mean, I look at someone like Prince, who had an insane output. He released like an album every year of his life, or of his career, basically. And a lot of them are fucking clunkers. A lot of them have hidden gems, and most of them are fucking great. So, I think it's just the law of averages at work. So, but that was just a fun little thing I caught. I was like, oh, I see. You double dipping.
Yeah, see, I would have never even realized that. So it's good to have a genius as a co-host.
Yeah, the genius of sitting in his own shit for 3 days, maybe. Not that I've ever done that.
No. Definitely not.
Don't tell girls
that. Now moving on to House of 1,000 Guitars. Now this one, through first listen, I was like, it kind of felt like the weakest one on the album. But then when you go into the lyrics, you realize how good it is. He says, hear the bitter and bored, wake in search of the lost chord that'll band us together for as long as there's stars here in the house of 1,000 guitars. It's that very much that kind of power of prayer feeling where he's going to worship at the altar of music. And he's like, here, everybody come with me. Like, let's go connect together over this. And instead of saying, church, it's the house of 1,000 guitars. And it's a reference back to the Radio Nowhere song from the Magic album.
Yeah, because, bells ring out through churches and jails. I think that's kind of a reference to Jungle Land too, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's a lot of like self-referential stuff in this as well, which I think is appropriate for a song like this, which there's also this line, the criminal clown has stolen the throne. He steals what he can never own.
Who do you think he's talking about?
I am left to wonder. He didn't mention a Happy Meal, so it's not Chris Christie, but someone of that ilk. But it's very clearly, again, saying, fuck that guy. But whether you're one of his followers or you're completely opposed to him, there is this undercurrent for all of us, this force that is music. And we can get over our divide. We can forget our depression. We can transcend who and what we are at the House of 1,000 Guitars, which I thought at first, I was like, admittedly, this is cheesy as fuck. Like, watching the documentary was the first time I heard it. Mm-hmm. And just like the way it's like, in a house of 1,000 guitars, I was like, I don't know. But it fucking grows on you. It fucking grows on you.
Yep. And it's where's the line here? So, meet me, darling, come Saturday night. Brother and sister, wherever you are, will meet in the House of 1,000 Guitars. And it's like, he's not only speaking to the people that are right there in the room with him, people that are still alive, but it's like he's talking to the ghosts as well. And it's just like, it's weird. He's trying to straddle this line between, he's still alive and part of the E Street Band, as well as he's still part of the Castiles. He's still in a band with Danny Federici and Clarence Clemens. Terry McGovern is still his manager. He's straddling all of these lines, between the living and the dead, and just coming to terms with the fact that, they're closer to the end than they are the beginning at this point, and it's just a very much again, like, very spiritual song. It's definitely, I think, since probably like The Rising or Devils and Dust, this is the most spiritual that we've seen Bruce become, and it's a lot more introspective than those previous albums. I think those previous ones where he was trying to find something, he was trying to like come up with answers. And on this album, I think he's found some of those answers, which is, just enjoy the people around you and enjoy what they bring to your life, I think is the answer that he's come to. But it's just a really good song that says, like, the House of 1,000 Guitars. You don't know if that's an actual building where he's going now, or if that's like the Valhalla for the E Street Band family. It's after they are dead and have passed away. Is that where they're all going to meet at the end? Like Danny Federici and Clarence Clemens, are they waiting there in the pulpit, waiting for Bruce to come and preach with them? And it's just, it's just fun to think about that stuff and just, I don't know, it's just a different Bruce. It's just really cool to hear.
And I like the sense of scale to it too, from the stadiums to the small town bars. It's like, this is accessible. This is a place you can get to no matter where you are. If you're seeing Bruce Springsteen in concert at fucking MetLife Stadium, you can access this. If you are sitting in your car waiting for your fucking windshield to defrost, you can get to the House of 1,000 Guitars. All you have to do to activate it is be part of music and to believe in music and give yourself over to it. And you can commune with people you've never met and never will meet. And you can reconnect with people you've lost. Maybe they're not musicians either, but like, I haven't spoken to my best friend in 10 years. Oh, we used to drive around listening to Hold the Line by Toto. And like, oh man, I really ought to call him and give this a thaw. Like, you never know. It's building off of the power of prayer. You really never know what's going to happen with something like music, what it can trigger. It can remind you that you hate someone. It can remind you that you love them. And it transcends a lot of what I think very literal, logical, linear thinkers run into. Like, oh, fucking, I'm a stone cold atheist. And I'm sure there's no God. I'm sure music has no power. I'm sure magic's not real. I'm sure astrology's bullshit. And what I can see, I can believe. This is a song that's encouraging you to be like, take a broader approach. Accept that there's some magic and delight in this world, and you can access it. Yep.
That's a perfect way to put it. I love that. Now the next one, this one gave me real Adam Raised a Cain vibes.
Oh yeah.
Rainmaker. Yeah. This is Bruce. This is Angry Bruce here. And this one, I think we can definitively say, is about politicians like Donald J. Trump.
Demagogues. Yeah.
Yeah. And who hopefully will not be our president very much longer. I think we made a point not to get like too political on the podcast here, but there's nothing good that comes from people like that.
No, fuck no.
And this one is, the kind of the story behind this one is, there's a drought, the farmers are pretty desperate because obviously crops are dying. this person comes along, promises them, rain, promises them an end to the drought. All they got to do is have some faith in him, and all they have to do is give themselves over to him, so it's not as if he is a really magnanimous person here, really trying to do some good. He'll do some good, but it's only in exchange for some loyalty or, whatever it is that he's asking them for. It's definitely a deal with the devil kind of situation here. And the chorus saying, Rainmaker, a little faith for hire. Rainmaker, the house is on fire. Rainmaker, take everything you have. Sometimes folks need to believe in something so bad, so bad, so bad, they'll hire a rainmaker. And it's just this desperation that you feel. And again, goes back to that kind of Ghost of Tom Joad album, and Tom Joad being from The Grapes of Wrath. And that, if you've read that book, you know how tough it was in the Dust Bowl in that time to even just survive. Like, crops don't grow, hardly ever rains. Was a very difficult time. And then you can think of somebody that comes along, this just kind of real antichrist kind of figure that says, well, clearly, your God has forsaken you. So believe in me, I'll help you. Like, what have you got to lose? And those are literally like, what have you got to lose is literally how Donald Trump asked for votes. He's like, well, what have you got to lose? Just vote for me, And it's just a really powerful song. I really, really like this one, and definitely rocks about as hard as any other song on this album.
It fucking rocks. It's got that kind of a carryover from the Western Stars flavor. Here's what's so brilliant about this fucking song. It is subtle enough that it has staying power that will transcend 2020 and the Trump presidency. Because if he straight up wrote about, there's a billionaire in a golden tower and blah, 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 like it puts a time and a place, and it makes it very, very specific. He intelligently creates this allegory instead, so that whenever you listen to this in 50 years or 5 years or 5 minutes from now, it will pack the same punch and have the same meaning. It's a dire warning against charlatans and demagogues. You can't put your trust in someone who rolls in and says they're going to solve all your problems for you. It's tempting. It's very tempting. You are so desperate that you want to believe them because they're saying all the things you've needed to hear. You feel forgotten. You feel abandoned. You want someone to see you. And here's someone who says that they do. But that cannot be trusted if it's being done for an ulterior motive, which it clearly is here. And I think, again, it typifies the great thing about Bruce Springsteen, which is he's not looking down on Trumpers or people who might have voted for him for whatever the reasons are. Are there straight up racists who voted for Donald Trump because they were like, throw a white hood on that guy, he's goddamn perfect candidate? Of course there are. Are there people who can kind of perform the cognitive dissonance necessary to go, well, I don't like that, and I don't like the grab him by the pussy thing, but, economically, I don't want my job in the coal mines to go away, so, I can hold my nose and do it. There are true believers. There are people who felt like they had no other choice, and Bruce Springsteen doesn't paint them with a broad brush. He's willing to give at least some of them the out and go, this is more a condemnation of the person that would perpetrate this and victimize you and take advantage of you and tell you that he's there for you when he doesn't actually give a fuck, and less like, what the fuck are you people doing? So it is very much a slap in the face. It's a memento to go, don't let this happen again. Let the story of the Rainmaker be an example to you. You can't fucking fall for this kind of snake oil salesmanship. You have to think critically, and you have to hold on to something and not just take the first charlatan that comes along at his word.
Yeah. And it's just, he's giving them enough credit to say, like, yeah, we're in a tough time, and somebody comes along and offers help, like, whatever the cost of that help is going to be, it's probably better than how you were living before, so it's really like he's giving them, like you said, the out of saying that they got duped by this person selling a false bill of goods. It's like nobody's going to actually be able to create rain, but when the rain comes, he'll take credit for it, say, yeah, that was me. See, I promised you rain. Here it is. And that all that does is just, they take advantage of chaos, is like Littlefinger says in Game of Thrones, like chaos is a ladder. These people see an opportunity in folks that are in a destitute situation. They're like, oh, well, I can exploit the shit out of this. So they do, because they don't have a conscience. They don't see what their actions are going to affect someone long term. They're just like, well, I can just use this like an ATM for now, and then when it's over, when there's no money left, I just hit the road down to the next one. It's just, it's really, like you were saying, he gives them the out. He's not calling them stupid for believing that, because he's like, you were in a hard situation. Like, what else were you supposed to do? But next time you see something like this, don't fall for it.
Right. And there's always going to be your requisite edgelords who are like, I voted for Trump because it's funny and he triggers the libs, and people who are like, yeah, fuck it, I don't want people coming over the border. Like, there's always going to be your requisite fucking assholes. And I think the thing with Bruce Springsteen is his ire, the bitterness of this song is pointed squarely at people like Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, Donald Trump, people who stand for nothing but their own personal gain. Fuck those three guys in particular. Yeah. I could go off, but whatever. But it's not even for him like, well, I don't want to offend people. And it's not Michael Jordan, Republicans buy shoes too.
Yeah.
He just honestly is like, hey, I'm trying to make sense of the psychology of how people who are otherwise potentially good people bought into this. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The archetype does, but man, that's a kind of desperation I haven't felt, or at least haven't felt in a long time. And I feel bad for you. I don't hate you, is kind of the tenor of the song, which is an interesting approach, because you don't get that from a lot of other celebrities.
Yeah. And he's a real one. He's a real one.
Bruce is on the loose, baby.
Yeah. Now moving on, because I realize we're at like an hour and 40 minutes right now, and we still got 4 songs to go.
Fuck.
But again, we knew this was going to happen. This was going to happen. If I Was the Priest. Now this one is, you want to talk about wordy Bruce. You want to talk about someone that, he said he wrote Blinded by the Light with a bottle of whiskey in one hand and a thesaurus in the other, just to like come up with the words that he needed for the song. And this was definitely in that, written in the same era and everything, has a very strong, he was raised very Catholic, very like Irish Catholic. So that's, if you're not familiar with that sect of religion, it's definitely very strict. It's if you sin, you burn in hell. Like, it's very, very strict version of Christianity.
It's draconian as fuck.
Yeah, we don't need to get into whether we agree or anything with that.
Sure,
I certainly think it has negatively affected more people than it has positively affected, just because of how strict the guidelines are and how it makes you feel like a shitty person if you do one thing wrong. But he's always kind of alluded to the fact that he grew up in that religion, because he does know a lot about it. He talks about Virgin Mary all the time. The name Mary runs through a ton of Bruce songs, and that's no mistake. When he uses the name Mary, he's doing it as kind of that virginal, innocent person. That's why he's using that name specifically. And you can go back to any Bruce song and you'll kind of see that, in The River, it's the same way. In Thunder Road, it's the same thing. That's how he references with that name. But this one is like a very kind of odd take on Catholic imagery. It's like saying Jesus was the sheriff and I was the priest. It's a very strange way to look at it. So what did you think?
I think if we're talking about Blinded by the Light being written with a thesaurus in one hand and a bottle of whiskey in the other, this one he must have had on one of those beer dispensing helmets while he had a cowboy novel in one hand and the Bible in the other, because it's just a mishmash. I don't necessarily get a message out of this so much as I get a story. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the 3 songs, along with Janie Needs a Shooter and a song yet to come, that came from those John Hammond demos from the audition that he had in 71. So, and it's very clear because there's a big distinction between new material that he wrote for this album and then some of the old stuff he pulled out of the mothballs. And I think this one functions as just a story more than it does an allegory for anything. I mean, I'm not here to say you can't read into it, but it really just is kind of one of those, and maybe I'm about to betray my lack of knowledge, but CCR, looking out my back door, there's a statue wearing high heels, look at all the fuck, I'm fucking up all the lyrics. What did he say about the T-Rex? I don't know, whatever, but it's like tambourines and elephants are playing in the band, that kind of shit.
Yeah.
What's that supposed to mean? Is it about Vietnam? Like, I don't fucking know. Like, or is it just one of those kind of songs that isn't really about anything other than the imagery and telling a story about something kind of funky? That's the impression I get here. But I fucking absolutely love the line, "There's still too many outlaws trying to work the same line."
Yeah.
God damn, that's so Bruce Springsteen.
And I think what that had to do with, because it was written back then, like this was back when, like I was saying, Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes, John Cafferty and the Beaver Brown Band was around at that time. You know, speaking of Eddie and the Cruisers, you talk about Elvis Costello all the time. I'll talk about Eddie and the Cruisers all the time.
Fuck it.
You know, there were a lot of these shore bands that were coming up alongside him. Like same thing, Billy Joel was coming out at the same time. So it was like a lot of these people were trying to tap that kind of just after Dylan kind of vein. You know, Springsteen, I think, did it most successfully. You know, you could make an argument for Billy Joel, but I think he went more towards like the, you know, piano bar kind of sound, you know, by the end of it. But, you know, I think that's kind of what he's talking about. And I think maybe, I don't know who specifically he's referencing, you know, but I think Jesus was a sheriff and I were the priest. I think he's talking about people specifically in that time period that were in those bands, you know, where it's like they all kind of saw themselves as the gunslingers, and he being, you know, probably freshly out of going to church every single Sunday and having to pray every night before dinner and stuff with his family, you know, probably fresh off that, like all of this Catholic and religious imagery is probably running through his head. This was probably an easy one for him to write. You know, he probably had in his head like, okay, well, I'm going to use this guy as the Jesus character, you know, whatever it is. But I think all these things are definitely about specific people. We'll just probably never know who they are.
Yeah, I would say that's probably accurate. Because, yeah, definitely, like, you see something like, well, Sweet Virgin Mary runs the Holy Grail Saloon. For a nickel, she'll give you whiskey and a personally blessed balloon. I feel like there's a story there. Like, you know, back when we were working the circuit on the shore, there was this one bar where there was a bartender, and, like, she was sweet on me, so she used to always give me a balloon because she thought, you know, that was like a token of her affection. I don't know. I'm just making that up right now. But I could see it being that kind of very personal thing that kind of makes it a little more abstract for us. So I'm willing to admit that I'm too dumb to interpret this song because
and again, like, I don't know if it's any deeper than that, but I think it reminds me a lot of, you know, when you talk about like Madame Marie getting arrested because she told fortunes better than the cops could. You know, it's like Madame Marie's is a real place on the Asbury Park boardwalk, you know, so it's like there's these real places that he always talks about. So in this, written in that same era, kind of tells me that he's probably talking about specific people and probably just has never or will never, you know, say who it's about. It's probably just his experiences there, and he just kind of relates them to that Catholic imagery to make them more interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, on that note, I don't have much more to say other than this song rocks. It's fucking great.
Yeah, it rocks. But we can get onto the most rockinest song on the album. Now, this one was the second single released, and this was the one where I was like, holy shit, Bruce is back, baby. Song is called Ghosts, and it starts right out. I hear the sound of your guitar coming in from the mystic far. Stone in the gravel in your voice, come in my dreams, and I rejoice. You know, this is another one that's about, you know, the Castiles, about Clarence Clemens, Danny Federici, Terry McGovern, you know, all these folks that have helped him along the way and have since passed away. But man, oh man, does this song fuck.
Oh my God, dude. Just even like, just a little like subtle boom, boom, bump, boom, 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 bump to start it, and then just drops out. I hear the sound of your guitar, scat down, and then the guitar just fucking kicks right in, and the song has shifted into high gear immediately. And every instrument in the entire arrangement not a goddamn thing wasted, nothing out of place. And it's just got this massive, again, this church-like feel. It's this like worshipful song that is about everyone that's lost, but it's like an Irish wake. It's enjoying them. It's celebrating them. I'm alive, and I'm alive because I'm full of you. You're not here. I'm sad. I miss you, but I honor you by being so fucking happy that I ever got to meet you, and you're in everything that I do.
Yeah, it's like they have become part of the life stream of, you know, if you're, I don't know what religion it is, and you know, I probably should look into it more, but you know, there's one of the religions has like the idea that when you die, your soul goes into the life stream, which is what keeps the earth and the stars and everything all together. You know, and I think this is him saying like, you know, all of you have become part of this, and this is me tapping into that. This is the song. Like I put my finger on that life stream, and this is what came out, you know, and it's just a really, truly incredible E Street Band fucking rock song. I mean, it is just so good.
Oh, I mean, I remember when the single came out, it was just like you and me geeking out about this, being like, this is E Street. This is Bruce. Especially after Letter to You without the context. I know we were like both kind of lukewarm to positive on it, but this just like, you need about 10 seconds before you realize that this is the real fucking deal.
Yeah.
I just love like that fucking line too. Your old Fender twin from Johnny's Music Downtown still sit on 10 to burn this house down. Count the band in, then kick into overdrive. By the end of the set, we leave no one alive. I mean, it's just like those high energy performances that Bruce is now famous for, where he had to like be helped off stage because he had just left it all out there. It's the inception of that. And you just see him like, those were the glory days.
And going, you know, kind of putting this song in context with the other songs like Last Man Standing, you know, by the end of the set, we leave no one alive. Now they say that, and they're talking, you know, they could be talking about a Bruce Springsteen concert where they'll play for 3.5 hours, you know, and there's no set breaks. And I mean, there's no openers. Like that's just straight up E Street Band rocking your socks off for 3.5 hours. Also talking about probably as they go along, more and more of them are going to pass away, you know, and by the end of the set, no one's going to be left alive. And he's saying the set being their career together as the E Street Band. You know, by the end of this thing, when we're all dead and gone, the only thing we're leaving is the music, you know, so it's looking at their lives as a set, like a Bruce Springsteen in an E Street Band set for a concert, you know, and it's putting it in that context too. I don't know if that's how he meant it, but you know, with the other songs here, it's like that was kind of just jumped out at me as like an obvious thing. I was like, well, he's talking about two things here. You know, he's talking about his life as well as just a single set. And as well, the chorus is just another incredible one. You know, alive, I can feel the blood shiver in my bones. I'm alive and I'm out here on my own. I'm alive and I'm coming home. You know, and it's just that idea that he has whatever demons he had, you know, he's buried them, you know, he's beaten them, you know, he's like, I've figured out what's important in my life and I figured out what I need to do for the rest of it. And that is like kind of pay homage to and give honor to these folks that have helped me along the way, you know, and I think that's what sounds like is going to be his life mission from here on out, enjoying his family, enjoying the guys in the E Street Band, and just trying to make sure that, you know, they're not forgotten, you know, that they make music that is vital, that is substantial, that lasts. And it's this song, man, you could put this right up there with like Born to Run. You know, you could put it right up there with Jungle Land. You put it right up there with Born in the USA. Any of those songs that are, you know, that you think of like classic Bruce, like this is going to be one of them for me.
Yeah, it's a hell of a mission statement for exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
Keeping those memories alive.
Yeah. Just truly great. Truly. If you listen to no other songs on this album, Ghost is the one. I mean, that's the one. Now moving on, because I think we got to try to get through this here.
Yeah.
Song for Orphans. So this was the third one that was written way back in the day. They said sometime in 1971. I'm sure he just wrote so much music back then that he probably can't even remember.
Yeah.
He's like, sometime I was staying in this hotel when I wrote this one. You probably can't even remember what year that was. But again, we go back to that very wordy Bruce. I mean, they're all like, if I were to read this, it's what, 5 verses? With
yeah.
Like 3 choruses, 6 verses, like 3 choruses in here. I mean, it's a hefty song for sure. And if you're listening to it, you're like, wait, what is he saying? Like about the Axis? Like what, you kind of listen to it and you're like, why is he talking about that? But then you go through the whole thing and you read the lyrics and you get the context of what he's talking about. But it's definitely classic Bruce Springsteen. He says, cheerleader tramps and kids with big amps sounding in the void, high society vamps, ex-heavyweight champs mistaking soot for soil. It's like, that's classic, like Greetings from Asbury Park era Bruce Springsteen with that kind of wordplay. It's just really good.
Yeah, and the whole song is basically, literally Song for Orphans is about these people who musically and outside of the world of music don't really fit in, don't really have a place, are rebels, are people who think outside the box, are people with dreams outside the mainstream. This could very much include someone like Frank Zappa, who I think was older than Bruce Springsteen. But again, I got to bring him up every episode. But people who didn't want to be constrained by convention despite the world doing its very best to put them in a box. So you look at like the first line, the multitude assembled and tried to make the noise. And black blind poet generals and restless loud white boys, times grew thin and the axis grew somehow incomplete, where instead of child lions, we had aging junkie sheep, which to me I interpret as like we had great black artists who were trying to break the mold. We had, these white boy bands that were trying to do something different in the era of rock and roll. But in this game that is the music industry, we were all kind of beaten down and beaten back. And if you didn't hang on to, again, that dangerous word, your authenticity and that thing that drives you, then you become another product. So instead of this like young, angry, hungry act, you become just another one of these like bloated hack elder statesmen who are just going to get up and, suck in their gut and do the song. So it's
like Elvis.
Yeah, like Elvis. So it really is kind of like a tribute to the people like who never left the punk ethos, so to speak, the people who never stopped being individuals, and as a result of it, really don't fit in anywhere and have no place to go, but you have this song.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely, and again, like extremely wordy. I mean, if you want to, you can probably unpack 4 different things in every single verse on this song. And again, he's so good at like, you're not really sure what exactly he's talking about, but the feeling he's conveying, so it's easy to relate to the songs, and it's just, you may not know exactly who he's talking about when he says aging junkie sheep, but, think about for us, it's like, the Rolling Stones are still playing the same songs, 50 or 60 years after they first came out. You know what I mean? It's like how many times did Meatloaf even just kind of play on the past music that he made, and like, because his newer music was shit, and it's just like, how many times have we seen that where it's like these luminaries of music stopped with their real creative output a long time ago, and now they're just basically a tribute band to themselves,
cashing a paycheck. Yeah,
exactly. And it's just this was definitely still young, angry Bruce, and thankfully I don't think Bruce is ever gonna, like, he's considered a classic rock artist. A lot of people look at it like he's old music, but he's never seen himself that way. He's always seen himself as just constantly creating. He's released albums every 4 years for, since Greetings from Asbury Park. I mean, it's, he's had some longer hiatuses, but, where he's wanted to do some different things, but he's always like, he's never just going to go back to that old Bruce Springsteen sound just because he knows it'll sell records. With this album, I think he encompassed his whole career. So there was some of that old Bruce, but like I was saying, there was some of that Ghost of Tom Joad album. There was some Nebraska in here. There was some of that really upbeat, peppy kind of synth music like he had on Born in the USA. There's definitely a lot influences that he's drawn on for this. Just all those influences are himself, basically.
Yeah.
But he somehow is able to still remain, relevant and up to date without falling back on that, without banking on the fact that he's like, oh, people are just going to buy my records because I'm Bruce Springsteen. He's never done that. He's always tried to put out what he thinks is the best record.
'Cause he's an artist. He's an artist. He's not in
Yeah.
it to just, cash the paycheck. And that's what I appreciate about him.
Yeah, he's a truly incredible man. And I think we can round this one off with I'll See You in My Dreams, another heartbreaker song for me on this one. But just a really good message. I'll see you in my dreams when all our summers have come to an end. I'll see you in my dreams. We'll meet and live and laugh again. I'll see you in my dreams. Yeah, around the river bend, for death is not the end. And I'll see you in my dreams. And it's just, you hear that and he's talking about Clarence, and sorry, getting choked up a little bit. He's talking about Danny Federici, and it's just, they are ghosts, but they're there with him. They were there in the making of the album because they've been there for his whole career before that, so it's just a really incredible kind of ending note to the album. Just a really beautiful song.
Well, and it's this idea, again, it functions on multiple levels. I'll see you in my dreams. Death is not the end. I will think of you every time I play music. I have all of our memories. I have everything you taught me. So those function as my dreams. I'll see you when I literally go to sleep and dream at night. You'll be there. Just thinking about you, you're with me. You're never lost. Just because I can't form new memories and experiences with you doesn't mean you're gone and you're lost to me forever. I'll have you until I finally get to join you. And in whatever form that takes, if you want to think of a Judeo-Christian interpretation of heaven, if you want to think of an afterlife, whatever is after this, dying is not the end of your story, especially not if there are people left who loved you. And it's a beautiful way to end the album.
Yeah. And it's just a way that only Bruce could do it, really.
Yep.
And plenty of folks have released tribute songs to their friends that have passed away, like Thundercat with his album was, overall a big tribute to Mac Miller. So you really got that emotion from that. But for some reason, probably just because I've been listening to Bruce my whole life, he's been so ingrained kind of in my family, that it's really comforting to listen to these songs. 'Cause it's like, listening like my mom is listening to it with me, and that kind of thing, where it's like, she's hearing me listen to this as well, and it's just a really kind of comforting thing to know that he's still putting this music out at 71 years old. That's still just as relevant to me at 33 years old. It's just a really kind of interesting thing. And as an artist, certainly is one of the most important ones we've ever had.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, to my point that he is an artist and it's not just about making money off people who are coming for the sure thing. I think this is an album as much for him and for the people that he loved as it is for you and for your mom and for your dad. And I thought of your dad. I was like, I wonder if he's heard this yet. It's not to air too much of your business, but since you brought it up, this was definitely one of the first thoughts I had. I was like, this would be to me an extremely comforting album and an extremely comforting notion in this last song that it's never over. It's never done. These people never go away.
Yeah. So I think pretty obvious, folks. We're going to say stream it.
Yeah.
Go buy the vinyl. Go buy the CD. Go buy a ticket when he goes on tour with this one. I mean, I cannot stress enough just how good of an album this is. Just how much of an experience it was to listen to it. And if you appreciate Bruce Springsteen at all, and if you've never really listened to him, this would be a great place to start because it's just so accessible. The themes that he's talking about are so real in everybody's life, and just the way that it moves through the album and the introspective nature of it really makes it very relatable. And I just really, again, can't stress enough, go listen to this one.
I think you would be hard pressed not to find something in this album that you can relate directly to your life. And it's music that's fucking great, and it's a message that we really fucking need right now. So absolutely go out and find this.
Yes. And if you don't mind, folks, go ahead and follow, subscribe, let us know what you want to hear. On Instagram, you'll find us at Out on That Line. The Gmail is going to be outonthatline@gmail.com. And on Twitter, Out on That Line 1. Also, this album is going to be coming out on Monday, which means the next day is going to be Super Tuesday. No, not Super Tuesday. Election Day. Sorry. Please go out and vote. If you're listening to this on a Monday, please, please, please go out and vote. Go do it. Take the time out of your day. If your boss says you can't, quit your job and go. It's a very important election for us. Alex, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, I just want to say thanks for joining us, and be wary of the fact that there are still too many outlaws trying to work the same line. You know what I'm saying?
Well, until next time, it's been great.